welcome back, everyone. Instead of doing this through a podcast, we're doing it live and in person. It's Sunday morning. We're currently going through our series called Into the Bible Verse, where we are talking about the Bible, how to read the Bible, what the Bible is, and what it isn't, so that we can become better students of it and just grow in our faith in ways that is better than not.
Very verbose.
Better than something.
So you guys get to you get to be privy to a conversation, and you know what? Feel free to interject at times. This is not just us talking at you.
Yeah. Thanks for filling everyone in. I want to preface, what's the word?
Preface.
Thank you. This conversation with a little story that happened this last couple of weeks at my work. For those who know, I work at the mall part-time, and my boss calls me from the store and says, "Kyle, get here now, I'm dead." And I see you laughing, Teslin, because you're probably confused as I was. I was like, "You're dead? Then who is this I'm talking to?" And he's like, "Kyle, I'm near death." And then I was like, "You sound okay. Are you literally dying?" And he went on and on about how our president of the company was coming to our store, and he was terrified. And with that, he felt like he was near death. And I, being the jerk I am, I egged him on and more. I said, "So what are your symptoms? What are you dying from?" And he said, "Kyle, I'm not being literal." So that's what I kind of wanted to preface. I can't remember that word for some reason. Preface the story because it sets the tone for where I want to go with today's discussion. That is the Bible literal in every single sense, or is it not?
Well, it's kind of like, if anyone else ever watched How I Met Your Mother? You got the Ted Mosby character who's known for correcting people. And so when it says, it literally blew my mind, he'd be figuratively.
Didn't actually blow his mind.
So that's sort of kind of like what I hear you saying in a little bit where we start off in some of this here.
That's a good way to go with it, yeah. So what do you guys think? Do you guys take the Bible literally? Or in some contexts you do, some contexts you don't? I'd be curious. Anybody? Depends on the context. I love that. I was thinking about this a lot. I love imagination. I don't know if you guys I have a hat. Imagine if I'm putting my imagination hat on. I don't know if that's because I have a 3-year-old and I have to have imagination. But Jesus is the door. Is Jesus literally a door? No. Jesus is the vine. Is Jesus literally a vine?
No.
No. What other ones do you guys like? Jesus is the bread.
Jesus, I'm the bread of life. Mm-hmm. You gotta eat his flesh and drink his blood.
That's right.
Yeah. Again, I want to preface, whatever the word is. That today's podcast conversation is about taking the Bible seriously, not always literally.
Right.
Yeah, I've actually heard it this way, and it's not mine. I can't remember who said it, but they just said you take the literal parts literally, the figurative parts figuratively, but the whole thing seriously.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great way to, yeah. So Michael Bird is a book that Aaron actually encouraged me to read, and I might not remember a long time ago. I think you also encouraged me to read it. And I try to find time to read. But one of the quotes was from his book called 7 Things I Wish Christians Knew About the Bible. And he said, "Are we serious about its language, its context, its genres, its complexities, the problems it throws at us, its beauty, its historical distance, its storyline, how the New Testament uses the Old, how the church understood things? This is what matters, not the commitment to some interpretive gold standard we call biblical literalism. Christian faith does not require biblical literalism." And I just thought that was a good way of putting it. Should use the table next time. So therefore, I want us to really understand when we're seeking truth in Scripture and what that means for us today. What I mean by that is, what is the author trying to get at? What is God trying to get at through a text, more than something literal and actually taking it very seriously? Does that work?
Makes sense to me.
I'm just making sure it makes sense. Michael Bird also tells a funny story that actually my professor used in Bible college too. He put a Bible on the table and he said, let's let the Bible speak to us. And he literally just sat there for a good 2 minutes until someone said, the Bible doesn't speak. It doesn't have a verbal voice. And that's the same thing when we talk about taking the Bible literally and seriously, is the Bible can't physically talk, as you guys know. It activates something in the reader. Right? Does that?
Yep.
When you're reading a text, it brings something out. Do you guys have any thoughts on that one?
Well, it's like the idea of like, what kind of knowledge do you find in a book? Knowledge isn't located in books, it's located in minds. And so it's the same idea where it's like, you can't hear the Bible speak, you have to read it. And reading it is what actually causes us to understand. And when we read the Bible, there's certain things we need to take into account, like we're going to talk about right today, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's been said, a lot of people will say when they're countering faith is they'll say their Bible is too filled with contradictions, or it's filled with too many points of view. And I think it's important to understand what those mean when people say something like that. So for example, point of contradictions, what God allowed for what to happen, but might sound like a contradiction today, doesn't mean God approved of it. So for example, we look at polygamy in the Old Testament, or possibly slavery, does not mean that God approves of those things. And people will say things like, these things should be allowed because, God allowed them back then. Just because he allowed them for them to happen does not make them right.
Yeah, well, it's the important thing to take into account with those things is the context of the time, the history, the culture, and in those cultures, actually God was actually presenting a better way for Israel, specifically talking about the Old Testament, about how to handle the culture and the way these things worked. Whereas especially when you think of slavery, those people who were Israel was actually told to set their slaves free and treat them differently than the other nations were treating their slaves. And so it wasn't an outright approval. It was actually God saying, okay, this is the context that you're in. You guys are going to be different with this.
I think it's also it's always coming back to the idea that this was written in a time to a people that probably, if it was phrased in such a way that would have made sense to us, it'd have been just, they wouldn't even understood it.
Right.
And I think just like even some of the times we wish that God said it this way. And sometimes if we go back and really start to understand the language, he technically did, but in a way that they would have been understood in that context. And it may not be as direct or in the way, again, we would like it today in 2022, but it is sometimes it is right there and said that way.
Well, it kind of goes back to what you were saying over the first week, which was the Bible was written for us.
For us, but
Not
to us.
us. Yeah. And that's so important to remember. So what about different points of view? You look at the Gospels, they have the same stories, but sometimes a little bit of differences. And some people will counter those and say those are contradictions. Those are false. How can they all be so different? And they're obviously wrong. And I always heard someone say these are points of view. So you can imagine if we all experience something together, for example, hypothetically, if I fell out of the chair right now and fell right on my face, Sean, you would see possibly something very different than Hudson over here. You might see me hit my head. Hudson might see me just like scream like a little girl. I don't know.
The Wilhelm scream,
The what?
Always finds a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand why points of views were written is because people found different details more important. So you look at, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago with the scene of the blind man. certain gospels account for certain things because it mattered to them in a different way.
Well, it also goes back at the beginning. The things that we need to keep in mind: the Bible is a library, not a one book that was written at the same time by the same person. A lot of those things that people say are contradictions come from an assumption because they understand the Bible as one book. They're not thinking of it as a collection of ancient texts that were brought together over time. And so you're right. They're bringing different perspectives, and the different perspectives highlight and emphasize different aspects of those stories.
I think it's a lot like it just sort of like, Courtney might know me a certain way, that obviously, and frame and how she might say this is who Jason is. And then Joseph, my son, though there might be some overlap, there'll be probably some very much differences in how he sees me, just from a perspective and a point of view. And that's a lot what happens in the Bible.
I went to a bike show. Believe it or not, Aaron, I like bikes too. Not maybe as much as you.
What? That's my thing.
Okay, we'll change a different story. No. And I took 3 youth with me at one point. This was back when I was in youth ministry, and they all brought something back with them that they loved the most. One talked about the sick air that one guy got. Oh, did you see the air he got, Kyle? I got some pictures of it. And then the next guy was like, that happened? Oh, yeah, I guess that's cool. And then he was like, I got his autograph. I got the biker's autograph. And he was so excited about that. And he told everyone back at the church about this autograph. And the third kid was like, I saw a bit of both of that. But you know what really mattered? Is I was with you guys. And it shows how the Gospels were written, as we said, different perspectives, not contradictions. Sometimes we get so wrapped up thinking these are contradictions that we actually forget the purpose of why the author wrote it. So, for example, Matthew. We got Matthew. What do the Gospels guys see of trivia? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're good. Am I missing one? Yeah.
That's 4.
Okay, just making sure. I was like, I haven't had enough caffeine this morning. Matthew, when he wrote, he was a Jewish man, as you guys might recall. He was a tax collector, so he cared a lot about the Jewish people. So you'll hear him referring a lot to the Old Testament in his gospel, and that's what was mattered to him. You hear Mark, who will use a lot of quick words, as I call them, or he'll use words like immediately, or and then this happened, because he was such a person that was so passionate about what Jesus was doing, that he didn't want people to miss it. And it was like, and then this happened, and then this happened. I always call him like where's my notes? He wrote these things for them to go viral. I don't know if that was probably not a word then.
Probably not a word then.
Go scroll, go.
English didn't exist then, so viral, not really a thing.
It was meant to get out there.
Meant to get out there.
Send it on the
Pass
donkey.
the scroll. Yeah, something.
Viral's a lot slower then.
Yeah, but I can imagine his pure excitement of wanting everyone to know these things. So he would just be very quick, and that's why he's the shortest gospel. He wanted someone to be able to read it in one sitting, hear it in one sitting, and be able to process it very quickly. Mm-hmm. And then you get Luke, who's the longest of all the Gospels. Some people think he's really drawn out, he's boring, but he's very detailed-oriented.
He was a physician.
He was a doctor, yeah. Cared about those details. And when you get to the doctor, back to the doctor, as you were saying, he focuses a lot on Jesus' healings because of that. And other people will be like, why wasn't this other one mentioned? Because Luke cared about those things. John was Jesus' best friend. So he probably witnessed a lot of those conversations. That's why he focuses on the conversations that Jesus had. Am I kind of making sense of why these things might be written differently?
It also really speaks to when we bring it all together. Let's just take Luke and John for an instance. Luke is speaking a lot to the humanity of Jesus, and John is speaking to the divinity of Jesus. And one of the things when you go to theology, maybe you've taken a class or read a few books about that, is God was 100% man and he was 100% divine. And really, we get some of that aspect like through a lot of things, but through Luke and John specifically, speaking to a little more directly to each of those parts of his character. In that, again, there's a humanity side that really said Jesus was very much like us in that, and then there was that divine side. And so those two perspectives together gives us a fuller understanding that is weird at the same time to think he's 100% human and 100% divine, but that's where we get some of that from, is simply what are they driving at? What aspects are they driving at too?
Did anyone take into perspective that maybe when they put the Bible together, they wanted the 4 stories so you could actually see the big picture,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
You gotta think about it that way, right? Like, you don't want to have just one person's opinion. You gotta see the whole picture, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and that's absolutely the point. Absolutely.
And vital to validating the truth of the stories.
Mm-hmm.
If we go back to the bike analogy, all the kids go to the bike show. They all witness bikes. That's the most important thing that they witnessed. And the same thing with the Gospels. They all centralize around the main things. Jesus, his divinity, as Jay said, his humanity, his healings, miracles, some type of teaching, and the fact that he rose from the dead. Those are the 4 most important things, and they all include them. So therefore, I believe that's why they're trustworthy. They focus on those things. They all make note of those things. Does that kind of make sense to you, Sean? What I'm trying to say? Yeah.
It's also just in understanding that this is actually a lot how ancients would have wrote, especially a narrative. The idea is that we are very chronological, exactly. Like at 10:15, this happened. And when they do that, when they do any historical accounts, it's not so much about the accuracy of the time. It's the point, the greater point that's being made, and that's why certain things are emphasized. And even sometimes the hard thing where it's like where John said it happened here and Luke said it's happened here. They're driving to a greater point. The story's true, but it's just like we're emphasizing different things for different times like that. Because they weren't necessarily, again, like us. We're just we're itinerant in the idea of time and schedule and stuff like that. And
That's why ancient history books are far different than contemporary history
very
books.
different.
I was just thinking about a class I took. Sorry, got just distracted. I'm a Bible nerd, and I'm sure these 2 guys would agree that they are as well. I've spent classes after classes on these things, and we're not going to bore you with every little detail, because unless you would want to, let's get together. If you want to talk more about these things, let's all go for coffee. Maybe, I don't know. But that's besides the point. I was going to say there's, as Jay said, there is reasons why they wrote things a certain way leading up to something. And I think back, and this isn't even in my notes today, is that's why the verses didn't exist. That's why chapters didn't exist. Because they were meant... Thank you. This is the day of my life, yeah. I don't even know if they're in order anymore. Sweet, thank you.
We're all family here.
We're all, yeah. Thank you, Sean. Leading to a greater point, and if we take away the verses and we take away the chapters, division, sometimes that we get so hung up on, we can see that greater point. And now I'm going to try to find my notes of where we were going from here, but you guys can read off your computer.
Into the last point.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important for us. In order to take the Bible seriously, we have to take seriously things like context and how ancient cultures did. And one thing that ancient cultures were far more comfortable with was mystery. Mystery was something that, and we can use this as a cop out to not really engage conversations with people who have questions about the Bible. But in ancient cultures, they used mystery as a place of comfort and peace and trust. Is that there's just things beyond our understanding that aren't fully understood and realized for us, but God has control of them. And so us we don't want to use that as a cop out just to shut down conversations that we are being proven wrong and feel like we're not trying to win people over with logic.
Yeah, this isn't the cop out to say, "And the Lord works in mysterious ways."
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not what we're talking
God,
about.
it's in the Bible. God said it. I believe it, kind of thing. It's if we want to take the Bible seriously, it's not just being like unquestioning about it. It's to ask questions, but ask questions that the Bible was designed to answer. And we have to take into account ancient cultures and the way they thought as best as we possibly can. And not only that, other people in this world who see things from different perspectives.
Yeah, and it's really, I think the best way that I think I've ever heard it is, we like things tidy, wrapped up in a nice little bow, and they were okay with, with more abstract. It's probably the best way to say it when we talk mystery is the abstract. It's even when we talk about things like, let's just say we talk about heaven, and we want to know what's heaven going to be like. Well, we have an idea, but it's pretty abstract. And for us, we want to get more in like what's going on. And there are unfortunately some people that have sort of dove into the Bible and just sort of really gave some really detailed thing. You're like, you're stretching beyond there. And it's the idea. But again, the ancient people were much more comfortable with it, the abstract. Especially maybe that's good to understand the mystery, the abstract. It's not concrete. There's still a little bit of, okay, I get it, kind of. There's still a little like, okay, this is great. There's still some tension that lies in there. And that's, we've got to learn to be more comfortable with some of the tensions that lie there.
If we go back to the hi-fi seminary, it kind of reminds me of Lean Into the Gray that you were talking about. Be okay with what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And it's hard. I'm such a reader, when I have time at least. And if I don't know something, I will research it and research it and research it. And when I can't find an answer, sometimes it drives me nuts. And I have to be okay when it comes to scripture and things I don't understand fully of why something was written a certain way or why this translation says it like this or this translation says it like that, and have to be okay with it. I think the bottom line, and this is something I really want to drive home as like the takeaway almost, is we can question the Bible so much that it can destroy us, our faith almost. Like, and I'm not saying that like literally. I'm not actually saying. I took a class and it was called textual criticism, something of the Bible, and it made me question my faith so much. And my professor was like, that was the point, for it to actually solidify your understanding of what you believe is the most important and being okay with the things that you don't understand. And it's hard because, like I said, I'm a researcher. I want to know everything. But if we let those things destroy us, we're not going to get anywhere. And I think that's why it's important to come to like a Sunday gathering like this, be part of a missional community to discuss these things. Guys, I have questions. Go to someone. Talk to your friend, talk to your partner, talk to your pastor, whatever it takes, just to dialogue together. And that's, I'm so thankful that's our staff meetings. Sometimes we get on these little tangents and we figure things out together, right?
Right.
That kind of wraps up with you guys have any final thoughts?
None, I think. No, I'm good.
Yeah, I think just the point is we want to take the Bible seriously,
I'll take it seriously.
and we don't need to worry about taking it literally. And taking it seriously means taking into account the shape, the form, the time period, and all that stuff of the Bible.
And please, if you have questions, talk about them rather than try to figure it out on your own sometimes.
That's it. Thanks for joining us.